Well, hey guys, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to do another tutorial and we're going to cover the issue of overwintering your plants and the way that we do that here in our nursery. And we're going to talk about how to build tunnels or some sort of covering to cover your plants with as needed, and talk a little bit about, do you need to do that or do you not need to do that? And to show you a couple of really simple ways to do this that I think anybody can do. So let's dive into overwintering plants. Now, primarily what we do today, we've done different things in the past, but primarily what we do today is we use these tunnels, like you see here in front of me, to overwinter our plants in that we think we need to overwinter. So let me just put that out there first. We don't overwinter everything. In fact, we don't overwinter most things under tunnels at all. Most of our plants, just for example, like an emerald green arborvitae, most of the plants that we have, we just leave them sitting out in the weather. We get asked that a whole lot. What do you do with your plants in the winter? Most of them, we don't do anything to them. We leave them sitting out in the weather. They freeze, they flood, whatever. They just get what the weather gives them all winter long, whether it's snow or anything else. So that's what we do with most of our plants. Nothing. The rest of our plants, we use these tunnels, and I call these low tunnels. You can call them whatever you want to call them. And we just make these arches here out of electrical conduit. So this is like 3/4 inch EMT electrical conduit. It's a common thing you can find at any hardware store anywhere. I mean, this is as common to hardware as a spark plug is to an auto parts store. This is not some kind of unique thing. Again, 3/4 inch EMT electrical conduit is what we use. And we use a pipe bender frame to bend these into shape so they're a consistent 6 feet wide. And you know, I really don't even know. I'm going to say that that's about 3.5 feet tall, but I don't know, and it doesn't matter. But all the arches are all the same height. So that's why you use something like a pipe bender, to make it nice and uniform so you're not guessing at your width, and it just makes a better product. So to start with, that's what we do. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole process today of building one of these tunnels. We've shown you guys that before in a previous video, but just kind of to backtrack to when we were actually building these. If I need to build more, I will. But really, all you have to do is take little pieces of rebar, maybe 12-inch sticks of rebar. You just hammer them down in the ground so you got 4 inches or so sticking out above the ground. And then you take your arches that you've bent and you just mount them on your rebar and just measure distance between them accordingly. It's very, very easy to do. The bender that we use to bend these pipes, I always put a link to it down in the description below. It's the same link where we get the benders for these low tunnels, or even for our higher tunnels that we use for our shade houses in our sales area in our nursery. But you want to have some way to bend your arches, these bows, whatever you want to call these, just so that they're uniform. And using something like that pipe bender tool is super, super easy. And you know, once you have a bender or whatever it is that you use, you never have to replace it. So, you know, the main thing is to get your bows right, your arches right, and to get them anchored to the ground. You have to be anchored to the ground because you're going to have a lot more wind typically, at least in most places, in the winter than you do in the summer when you don't need it. So to cover this with plastic, to put your arches in place, to put your bows in place, you got to get it all anchored down. So those are kind of the principles, really easy. Now, another material that you can use to make a low tunnel is rebar mesh reinforcement, like you'd use for concrete work, for a driveway, for a house foundation pour, whatever it is. You might make a concrete slab, and that is to use rebar mesh. So we've used this before, and the reason that I quit using it and started going to the tunnel format that we're using now, to the taller, wider format, is simply just a matter of size. So let me show you what I mean. Now, you're not going to be able to see this very well. I've had a hard time getting it out here in a way somewhere where you could see it at all. But leaning up against my shade house here, you can see this piece of wire. It's wire mesh. You can see it mesh, just meaning it's like a grid. And it's about 8 feet this way and about 4 feet this way. And those aren't exact measurements, and it doesn't matter. But you can make a tunnel out of those, putting them together. And I'll show you a little clip here of what this looked like when we used to use these. And they work really well. The thing is, they're going to be smaller than the low tunnel I just showed you a minute ago. And just overall, you're going to have fewer square feet to put plants if you use something like this. But they work really well. They hold up really well under a snow load. and they're just easier to deal with because they're smaller. So if you have a smaller space, or if you have fewer plants that you're trying to overwinter, this might be the way to go because it works really, really well. Now, one of the things that I'm really interested in getting done here pretty soon at my place, because we're supposed to be in the mid-20s in about 5 or 6 days, so it's going to get cold out here, is this is Macrophylla hydrangeas, and I've shied away from growing Macrophyllas before because I've never been able to get them right. Well, check this out, guys. These things look absolutely beautiful, and we've had 2 nights now, 32 and 31 degrees with heavy frost, and I've just had this area covered with a shade cloth. So just to provide shade, no protection from air temperature at all. And then I've got a lot of trays of cuttings from these Macrophyllas and from other hydrangeas and some other plants that I want to put out here and just cover them all up for the winter. So let's talk about that just a little bit. I went several years in a nursery without ever covering anything at all. And I mean absolutely zero coverage of anything. And most of my plants did very well. I always did have some plants that would die. I still struggle getting my perennials through the winter very well. So that's a code that I still haven't completely cracked yet. But one thing that I will say, if you're in doubt, should I cover, should I not cover? Listen, you're probably gonna fare better overall if you cover some of your plants. Now, is it necessary? Probably not. It depends on where you are, what your winter is like, and what plants you have, and I can't answer that for you. I would say, as a general rule, the farther north you go, the more likely it is that you're going to need to cover your plants in the winter, with the exception of things like evergreens and things that you know are hardy that are going to come back every year pretty much no matter what you do. People also ask us pretty often about water. Do you water your plants in your tunnels in the winter? And occasionally I do, but here's the thing about inside that tunnel. If you've got it sealed up, it is really humid in there. Your plants have virtually no need for water in the winter while they're dormant. Like, they don't use any water as a part of the transpiration process because they're dormant. They're not doing that, so they don't use any water. All you need to do is just make sure that your plants don't dry out. And if you live anywhere like I do, there are weeks that will go by at a time in the winter when, you know, your nighttime temperature is in the 40s and 50s, and you're in the 50s, 60s, maybe even 70s some during the day, and you need to open the ends of your tunnel and let them breathe a little bit, or it gets really hot in there in the winter. So again, it's another one of those variables, like where do you live and what is your winter like? And I know winters vary a lot year to year. Sometimes you have a terrible winter, and sometimes you don't have much of a winter at all. So all of these things are to be taken into consideration when you're thinking about, do I cover or not? It may be that you need to cover them for a while during your real cold spells, then uncover them when you got another cold spell coming and lots of wind and, you know, just really changing weather, and you cover them back up. There's different ways that you can do it, and you just kind of have to feel that out and figure it out based on your zone and based on your particular climate. So then let's talk a little bit about what low tunnels do, or just covering your plants. Let's talk a little bit about what that will do and what it will not do. A couple things it will do. It moderates at least everything about your weather. It doesn't moderate temperature a whole lot. When you keep these covered, if you're 20 degrees at night in the winter, you come outside, check the air temperature inside your tunnel, it's going to be 22 degrees inside your tunnel. It just doesn't moderate the air temperature a lot. So that's really not why we're covering. Another thing that it does, that I think may be the most beneficial thing it does, is it gives you complete control over how much moisture your plants are getting. Now, in the winter, plants are probably prone to getting too much moisture because it will rain and your pot sits there, you know, at least rain wet. Even if it drains well, it still just stays wet. And then you get cool, cloudy days or cold days, the pots freeze and they just stay really damp for a long time. And that can be conducive to rot in your roots. So that's one thing that it helps with for sure. It also keeps your plants out of the wind. And one of the reasons that wind can be difficult on plants is because it causes rapid drying. So the fact that you've got them covered, there's no wind, and you don't have to worry about too much moisture. Those are two really good things. And then just the overall moderating effect that's going to happen with the weather inside the tunnel is really helpful to your plants, just to give them a slightly more stable environment than just being left out in the wide open elements. Now, a couple of things that your tunnels and covering your plants will not do is it will not stop your plants from going dormant. Now, that's not bad. Your plants need to go dormant. If you're growing anything that's not an annual, Part of the life cycle of that plant is it has to go dormant. So for example, sitting right beside me right here are some small silver dollar hydrangeas. Well, if you go plant these silver dollar hydrangeas in South Florida where they never go dormant, they're not going to thrive. They may even die. I'm not sure about that. But part of their life cycle is that they need to freeze and go dormant. And that's what happens with all of your plants in any climate that gets freezing temperatures. They have to receive a period of cold in order to live. So your low tunnels don't prevent that. You need your plants to go dormant. That's a good thing. Another thing that your low tunnel won't do is keep annuals alive. Listen, annuals just can't stand freezing temperatures, and that word annual can mean different things in different places. I understand that, but I'm talking about flowers that have a single growing season and then they die when the weather gets cold and they're replanted again the next year. These are not house plants that you don't need to bring your weigelas and your spireas inside for the winter and keep them warm. That is not going to cause them to thrive. In fact, it's going to cause them to die. Deciduous plants need to lose their leaves and go dormant. So we're not trying to turn this into a heated greenhouse or anything like that. All we're doing is moderating the winter, but it can make a tremendous difference. So if you're going to cover your plants, what kind of coverings do you use? Well, you need to use white plastic. Now, don't just go down to your lumber yard and see if you can have all of their free plastic that they're throwing away. Do not do that. You need to buy you some, or however you can acquire it, some legitimate greenhouse plastic. And sometimes it's called overwintering film, sometimes it's called greenhouse plastic, but it needs to be white and it needs to have some kind of terminology in it like overwintering or UV or whatever, because if you get just generic plastic that you might use to cover up lumber with, or that you might use to just cover up anything outside, I don't know, I can't even think of a good example, that plastic is going to break down really, really fast. And I'm talking about in a matter of weeks. It's just going to crumble and fall apart into nothing. You have to get some kind of material that's rated for this type of use. So check your greenhouse supply stores. If you have anywhere like that locally, you can look for this stuff online. I think there's a Farm Plastics website. I can't think of the name of it. I'd encourage you to just look for it. You can find this material. It's not that hard to find. Greenhouse Megastore, I know, carries it. And anywhere that sells supplies for nurseries and greenhouse, it's a common product. So just make sure that you're buying white plastic. Don't ever put clear plastic over these things. It'll get really hot. And I mean, you can be 10 degrees at night and 90 degrees in there during the day. And those temperature swings are not good for your plants. You don't need it to be, you don't need 70 and 80 and 90 degree temperature swings inside your covering during the day. So stay away completely from clear plastic. Another thing worth mentioning, it can be a bit of a downside about overwintering, is when you overwinter your plants in tunnels or covered in whatever kind of covering you decide to design or manage or rig up that you want to use, you have to be careful in early spring. Those late days of winter and early spring, you get a little warm spell, those plants may start leafing out. They may start waking up a little bit before you want them to. And the reason that I say before you want them to is it makes them a little bit susceptible to a late freeze. So let's say that your plants normally start leafing out around March the 1st. Well, if you have them covered, they might start leafing out around February the 20th. So what does that mean when you have a late freeze on April the 1st? It means that your plants already have a lot of foliage on them, and there's the possibility for some late frost damage to be done on your tender plants that are leafing out. So that's just one thing to note. I don't really know how you prevent that. It's just something to be aware of. Never had a major problem with it, but it's something that I've noticed before thinking, man, this could have been a problem if it had been a couple of degrees colder one night or other. So it's one of those things where you just got to kind of think through what you're doing. It's not necessarily the super black and white thing. There is some ambiguity involved in it, but to me, on the whole, especially if you've got plants that you know that are susceptible to not make it through the winter, it's probably better to cover them than not to cover them. And you might think of it as almost like a type of insurance that you're doing on your plants. This is just one thing I can do to probably improve their survival rates, but you're doing that knowing that things can still happen. Overheating in the winter, if you're in a hot or warm winter climate, or just relatively warm winter climate, that's us. We can have those issues. So anyway, you always have to keep an eye on your plants. Don't let them dry out. Don't let them burn up. You can't just forget about your plants all winter. So just some other things to keep in mind. And here's some of those beautiful little Macrophylla Penny Mac hydrangea plugs, about 200 of them here that we're going to be covering because I want these things to make it. So I don't know if it guarantees they will or won't, but I like our chances better if we cover them. In addition to the Penny Max here, here are the little Penny Max starts down here. And we got a bunch of limelights, and we got some crepe myrtles and some pinkies and spireas and weigelas, and we're gonna come in here and finish this up with some bee balm, some quince, maybe some gardenia. But this is gonna basically be this tunnel for now. So we'll get this covered up in the next few days, because we're still several days away from having real cold weather, and we're gonna just let them get cold. I mean, we'll probably cover it up that really cold first night with the ends open. We're not trying to keep them warm. We're just trying to moderate things a little bit. So we need these plants to go ahead and go dormant. So we're looking forward to that, but this is kind of what it looks like when we're getting ready. Then we'll just lay out our plastic here and cover it right over the top. A 12-foot wide sheet of plastic covers these 10-foot arches really well. So that's what we do. So that's going to be it for today, guys. It's all about tunnels and overwintering plants. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I will try my very best to answer them. And I hope this has been helpful to y'all. So, guys, I appreciate y'all watching. I love y'all, and we'll see you on the next one.